My name is Peter Crosson. I worked at the paper mill for 40 years, and then I finally got lucky and the mill paid me to stay home. They said, here's a severance package, you stay home, you've got it, and that was good. When I started the mill, things were a little different than they ended up being a few years later. There, at the old mill, which we called it up above, I had a chance to work on the automation up there. I figured that if you work on the automation, it's a good chance the automation is not going to put you out of a job. When I first started the mill, they have a machine called the Super Calendar, which puts a nice glossy finish on the paper, and that's where I worked. Your chances of getting laid off in the job I was in are very good. If the customer wanted paper that was shiny, I worked. Yay, things are good. If the paper decided it's not going to have a glossy finish, I get laid off. When you get laid off at the mill, it used to be a pretty interesting job. You normally get laid off if you went into the bull gang. In the bull gang, you could be doing anything from going inside little tanks and help remove the chemicals so they can put fresh chemicals in. And they put you on with a group of guys that were all bigger than you, and you were the only guy that fit into the manhole in the tank. OSHA didn't do a whole bunch of rules like, you know, you got to sniff that tank for gases before you go in there. Well, get in, you're still breathing? Okay, it must be good. Of course, it was a water softener tank for the power plant, so therefore stuff is a little bit wet, so you're lucky you brought your wetsuit, which you didn't, and you had a lot of fun. The next day, that water softener job was done. You're still on the bull gang, but the paper machine was down for a major shutdown. On top of the paper machine, they have exhaust hoods and let all hot air from the paper machine escape to the atmosphere and get rid of the moisture and everything. And that day is nice and sunny out there. It's probably about 85 degrees. And what you have to do, you got to go in this little hole inside of this housing there. And of course, it was sunny. Of course, it was warm. They know that you're the small guy of the crew, so they let you go into the hole. And what you're supposed to do is you take this rivet and you push it in the hole, and then you put a piece of metal up, and the guy outside is supposed to hit it with a sledgehammer. And that's supposed to round it over so the hood would stay in place, and I guess it is. The hood's still up there on top of the machine. You never got bored from a lack of an interesting job. Because this place called OSHA did not exist, a lot of safety standards were different. Let's say you had to go underneath the railroad tracks between the power plant and the sulfite mill. They decided that the railroad framework needed to be cleaned up and painted up. So they give you a brush and they give you a little mask to put over your face and some goggles to try to keep the coal dust out of your eyes. And you're supposed to scrape it with either a scraper or a brush, and so they could paint it. It was a really good system, except unfortunately they didn't have good filters back then that they do now. Just like down the old mill, we use almost no chlorine. When I had a chance to go up to the new mill, to me it was, wow, this is good. It's all new fancy automation. Things are going to be a lot better. Well, some of the things were better and some weren't, but you never got bored. That mill kept growing and growing like a tumor. First you started out with 2 paper machines, then you added a third one, and then later you added 2 more. You could walk from one end of one machine to the end of the pulp mill without ever going outdoors, so you didn't have to get worried about getting wet or getting cold in the winter time. There's a lot of places that somebody wanted to hide that they could hide. We used chlorine bleach, chlorine gas to make the paper whiter. Unfortunately, the woods coming out of the forest don't have enough brightness to make people happy. Once in a while you get a chlorine leak. Back then they did not have any good way to detect the chlorine leaks good sometimes, and to alarm so people didn't go in the wrong direction. So they finally came up with some new toys that tried to detect that. And we fortunately had these nice lollipops, we nicknamed them. They were masks, you stick the thing in your mouth. All the industries are doing the same thing. There's a company, MSA, they called it, that used to stamp them all, showed that they were certified for chlorine gas and so forth. And then 3 or 4 years later, oh, you can't use those for chlorine. Those aren't good for chlorine. Okay, take it off your belt and you show it to them. What's that say there? It's for chlorine. And it wasn't IP's fault. It wasn't Crown Paper's fault or anybody else's. Fortunately, everybody had to learn. When they went from the old mill to the new mill, they changed to a different process to cook the chips to make the paper. The old one was a sulfite process. Then they went to what they call a craft process. The big improvement on the two is the river stayed a lot cleaner. On the old one, they used to have to take the liquor, they pour it on a bank in a lagoon on the other side of the river and hope most of it didn't seep down through into the river. And the new one, you just take the thing out, you squirt it into a boiler and light it up. Things are a lot prettier in there. Except for one slight problem that they had trouble conveying to us good enough. They're fortunate they had a school here at Murray Hall to try to teach people all the do's and don'ts on the power plant. And I was luckily able to go to that school along with a couple other interesting people. Frank Austin was running the whole school, and they had people come from all the different boiler company stuff. Now this stuff they squirt in the boiler because of the craft process, it has one real bugaboo. Don't get any water in it when it's hot. It gets very exciting. Like if the water gets in, it explodes. Okay, what is the boiler made of? It's made of steel tubes. And what's inside the tubes? Oh, that's water. Oh, well, no sweat, except for those tubes can corrode because of the liquor, we call it. The one squirted in the boiler was black liquor. What comes out is green liquor. And if you got lucky, you never see a major explosion. And I'm fortunate to say I never see a major explosion. I like that. Now, when it cools off enough, you can finally shut the fire down completely, shut the whole boiler down completely, and go in and repair the bad tubes. They did at least a couple times a year go in and check the thickness of the tubes to make sure they don't leak. Sooner or later, they're going to. Now, one of the things you do, the group I worked with the most at the new mill happened to be, say, for the automation. So what do you have to do to make sure it's cool enough? You have to have somebody go in with a probe and stick it into the smelt bed and see how warm it is, because you can't shut things down until it cools off. So one of the guys on the crew and myself, when I was in that particular area, we would go in with a probe. We'd go down to the bottom of the furnace and we stick in this temperature probe to verify the temperature. If the temperature was below a certain amount, things are good. If they weren't, you run pretty good speed to the other end. Fortunately, at that age, I could run good speed. Now I can't remember what that's all about. But when you get out of high school, in this area, that was definitely one of the jobs to look forward to trying to get in, is the paper mill. When I got out of high school, unfortunately, I was not 18 yet, so I couldn't get here. But the day I turned 18, I come to the mill and I took a test, and Fortunately, there weren't many people taking a job tests at that time of year. So out of the 6 of us who did the test in the morning, 5 of us started working the following day and 1 started that night. And my job when I was in high school was bag groceries for a chain of stores called First National Store. And so it went from First National Store to International Paper Company. So I mean, I'm staying up in the national thing all the time. The trouble is my boss at the First National Store didn't want to let me go. So I basically ended up working days at the First National Store and nights at the paper mill for about 3 months. But when you get in the mill, there's a whole bunch of career paths. Some people work in the office. Some people learn to be millwrights. At the old mill, we even had a couple of people doing blacksmithing there, which is a craft you don't see that often anymore. At the old mill, the automation, most of it was pneumatic. At the new mill, they made it all electronic. Well, electronic definitely doesn't freeze in the winter. If you have pneumatic instrumentation, you've got to worry about the moisture in the air freezing. And so all of a sudden, this tank that you think is doing good and it's not too high, you find out that the signal from the transmitter's messed up because the signal line froze. And so the tank overflows, and people get excited for some reason when tanks overflows. And they also switched to electronics. One of the nice things they did, they come up with walkie-talkies. Well, walkie-talkies are good, except for one thing. If you have a pneumatic line with just air going through it, and you click a walkie-talkie, no problem. Now, if you get the new electronics, without this certain filter system that they had to invent there, every time you key the mic on somebody's walkie-talkie, it may make all the signals in the area go crazy. So somebody had to scratch their head a lot to get that fixed. But fortunately, the thing's gotten smoother and better, and let's hope it stays the same. Like my parents, my mother was a nurse at the hospital. My father owned a garage up on Church Street, and they never got involved in the mill too much. But I had an older brother. He ended up working on paper machines. Well, paper machines is like Super Calendar where I worked. It pays well. You work really hard for 10 or 15 minutes an hour, then you gotta wait for the rest of the roll to come out, and then you work like 10 more minutes, and in the meantime you gotta figure out how to stay awake. It was boring, and then I finally see this good news on the bulletin board there one night in the Super Calendar room. They're gonna be building a new paper mill. They have some openings for oilers, instrumentation people there, and about 5 different crafts. Well, one of them was millwrights. Well, working in my father's garage, I had a pretty good idea how to take apart a car and put it together. And I thought it would be pretty nice to be a millwright that they take apart things and put it together, and it's like big puzzles. And so we went to that. Well, okay. I was working 3-11 that night. So next morning I came in early so I could go into personnel and apply. Oh, those openings have all been full. Uh-oh. I said, I thought they just put it up. Oh yeah, they did, but it's all full. But there's still jobs for oilers and instrumentation people. I said, well, I know what oilers do, and I really don't want to be an oiler. I said, that'd be exciting as making paper on a Super Calendar. What's instrumentation? Well, I found out, well, that was the craft for me. And I'll tell you, I've never been disappointed after that. You don't get bored because of something that doesn't have something background that's going to be, you have to be a detective to try to find out what they all are. Most of the time, the instrumentation people work alone. Once in a while they work with somebody else. Like the millwrights, it's always a group under one boss. So you do your own thing. If you learn to do it well, it's good for everybody. Because the mill grew so fast, there were a lot of opportunities, and I'm glad I have one of them. The mill sent me to 2 other mills there for a short time. One of them was to observe people who were modifying a paper machine down South Carolina. And so they asked me and Freddie Willett from the mill to go down there and help test out the equipment before they tried to do the startup. I worked with the automation down there. Most of the people like me on the different mills, they work with electrical and instrumentation people. And that guy was stronger in electrical, I was stronger in instrumentation, so we worked together to get the machine changed. They were trying to add another dryer section down there. And so that's where I see Roger Purinton and our other cohorts down there. And they sent me once to Oregon to work for 5 months. And they're an entirely different world over there. Instead of having 5 fine paper machines, here they have like a thick linerboard like you use to wrap rolls. And that machine over there, that one machine made almost as much tonnage as our 5 do, but it's not the same quality of paper. Out there, it's so warm on the coast of Oregon that they don't not have to put walls on the outside of the pulp mill or the power plant, except where the electrical control centers or electrical MCCs are. Most of the places open. You can go up on the 5th floor and look out and see everything. It's kind of neat. And you can watch next door. They have a lumber yard, and this is how many trees there are on some of the trucks coming in. They put a chain around the back of the tree and tie it to a set of dolly wheels, and then put a chain around the 5th wheel on the truck, and that they haul that one log to the mill. different world. And there you are in November, outdoors, there at midnight. I worked night shift over there, and I was 7 at night to 7 in the morning, and T-shirt was it most of the time. And I was there from July to the end of November. The paper industry varies a lot depending where you go. I have a hobby which I've been pursuing for a long time, gotten reasonably good at it, and that's repairing computers. And when computers, like I started doing it fairly good in about 1986. By 1990, the rumors that the paper industry was done now were real strong, and it never did slow down a lot. People were still keeping paper copies because they didn't trust the computers, partially. And the more people who mess up with their computers because they don't back up their files before the hard drive dies or something, it's going to make a difference on how much paper we ever make. It's not the best thing to be in right at the moment, I don't think. But what is the best thing? It keeps changing. If you want to know the best street in this town there to get good food, you go on Muncie Avenue. My wife's a good cook. she may not be happy if I invite the whole world there. So, but say like this town here, I don't know if I guess you wouldn't even know which ones. Bunch of the pictures you see around here, say some I collected over the year from Muriel and all them. It's kind of neat that when you find a new one, they're getting harder to find. I got about 350 of them of this area. They're from 1932 to not too long ago.